Sleep, an important part of our lives. Here are some no-sleep stories that may prevent the much-needed slumber. Today's video is also long enough for you to possibly drift away. Without further hesitation, let's begin. My father was a police officer. One morning, he was acting strange. I watched as he walked into the kitchen, wearing his uniform, headed for the coffee maker on the counter. He poured some coffee in his favorite blue ceramic mug, before sitting down across from me on the small, round wooden table. He brought the steaming blue mug to his lips. The smell of fresh, hot coffee filled my nostrils. It wasn't long before I noticed the bags under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Taking occasional sips from his coffee, he numbingly stared out the window to the backyard. His dark, brown eyes seemed distant and filled with concern. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked worriedly. The words seemed to make him snap from whatever trance he was in. "I'm fine, kiddo. Just eat your breakfast," he replied. It was more than clear that something was wrong, but I knew my dad. If he didn't tell me after I asked the first time, then there'd be no point in asking again. So I just nodded and went to pour more cereal into my bowl. As a couple minutes went by, I watched as he pushed back his chair and got up from his seat. "I gotta leave for work, buddy. I'll see you tonight." He chugged down the rest of his coffee and set the empty mug on the table, making a small thud as the ceramic hit the wood. He barely even looked at me as he walked out of the room. Later that night, I was woken up to the sight of my dad sitting on the edge of my bed. The room was dark, but the dim yellow glow of the hallway light, creeping through the crack of the slightly ajar bedroom door, was enough to help me make out the serious look on his face as he sat there, staring down at the floor. Confused, I turned on my side to look at the bedside clock on my nightstand. It read 2:45 a.m. I turned my eyes back to my dad. Is he just getting home from his shift? I asked myself, perplexed. After rubbing some sleep off my eyes, I noticed he was holding a gun. "Dad?" I muttered, my gaze fixed on the Glock in his hand. "You know that I love you, right, kid?" He blurted out, still staring at his feet. That caught me off guard. He and I hardly ever said that to each other. Don't get me wrong, my dad and I had a great relationship. We just weren't good at that kind of stuff. "Yeah?" I said, as I sat myself up. "I know," he said. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the living room, almost making me jump out of my skin. It sounded like the front door had been kicked open. Dad turned his head, focusing on the direction of my bedroom door for a few seconds, before returning his gaze back down. I watched a mix of fear and sorrow wash over his face as he let out a tired sigh. "I should have known it'd be back," he mumbled under his breath as he shook his head. "What do you mean?" "I'll always be with you, you know." He breathed suddenly, still not looking at me. "Dad, what's going on?" I uttered, as dread started to spread through my entire body like wildfire. "No matter where you go, no matter what you decide to do with your life, I'll always be with you." He tightened the grip on his gun as the words escaped his lips. "Please, Dad, just tell me what's going on." My shaky voice pleaded with him. "I love you, son," he said finally as he turned his face to me, a serious yet warm look on his slightly wrinkled face. "I love you too, Dad." It was always hard saying those words to him, but right then, they left my lips without even realizing it, almost like a reflex. At that moment, part of me felt I'd regret not having said it more in the past. "Now, promise me you won't get out of this room until you hear the front door open," he demanded, with a sharp look in his dark brown eyes, as he stared straight into mine. "What? Why?" "Promise me." He raised his voice, inching himself closer to me. "Why?" I pressed. Usually raising his voice was all it took for me to do whatever he told me to, but not this time. I was too scared. I needed to know what was happening. "Just promise me, son," his voice cracked, as he placed his hand on my shoulder. For a second, I thought I was going to see him cry for the first time. I couldn't form any words. The shock of seeing him like that, something I thought was impossible, knocked any form of speech out of me. So, with trembling lips and watery eyes, I just nodded. He sniffled and looked up at the ceiling for a few seconds, as if to try to make imminent tears fall back. With a sigh, he brought his gaze back to me and pulled me close, placing a kiss on my forehead before getting up and trudging towards the door. He stopped right as he reached the door and turned around to look at me. "I'm gonna do my best to end this here, once and for all." He then turned back around. Standing there, he looked down at his weapon and pressed the release button on the side of his pistol, extracting the magazine. After making sure it was full, he popped it back in and pulled back the chamber, making a satisfying click that echoed through the dark room. Gun in hand, he grabbed the doorknob, and I watched as he twisted it and pulled the door open, then shutting it behind him and leaving me in complete darkness. Sitting in my bed, in that pitch-black room, I waited and listened, my body shaking as I counted the seconds, not knowing what was about to happen. Suddenly, a single gunshot echoed through the house, and was quickly followed by the rapid thuds of inhumanely fast footsteps. It sounded like a hammer hitting the hardwood floor 100 times within a second. A wet, munch sound echoed through the walls, accompanied by a loud grunt from my father, which was followed by a loud crash and splattering of glass. And just like that, it all went silent. I just sat there, heart racing. I wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but I couldn't move. It was like my mind was awake, inside a dormant body. Minutes that felt like hours went by. Sitting there in complete darkness, I waited, building up the courage and telling myself I needed to do something. I needed to see if my dad was okay. Suddenly, the turning of the handle and the creaking of the hinges sliced through the silence of the night, and I watched in horror as the door started to slowly open. The silhouette of a man stood in the doorway, the faint yellow light of the hallway coming from behind him. It was hard to tell if the man standing across from me was my dad or an intruder. I sat there, not able to make a sound, waiting and hoping to hear my dad's voice emerge from the figure. Mere seconds seemed to drag on for an eternity. My heart was thumping against my chest, beating so hard, out of nowhere, a car slowly drove past the house, and its headlights flashed through the gap between the curtains. Just enough for me to see the blue of my dad's uniform and the shine of his badge. Letting out a sigh of relief, I felt the tension in my body easing up. "Dad, you scared the hell out of me. What's happening? Did someone break in?" Whatever relief I felt before was ripped out of my chest as I watched my dad drop to all fours and crawl to the dark corner of the room. My mind started racing. This isn't Dad. This isn't Dad. This man is not my dad. It's amazing how quick our brain can switch from relief to absolute terror. I tried my best to remain still, hoping that, somehow, it was going to keep that man, crouched down in the dark corner to my right, from hurting me. The whole time, I could feel him staring at me. I could hear his raspy breathing, just a few feet away from me. Let me tell you, feeling the full effects of adrenaline while your whole body is frozen with fear is like torture. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest at any moment. Somehow, I mustered up the courage to turn my head in the direction of the man. As soon as I did, he started to slowly raise himself up, though a loud cracking of bones echoed through the room as he did so. A cold, numb feeling sank to the pit of my stomach. He was now standing up. At that moment, the only thing I could think of was the lamp on my bedside table. I needed to see him, to see it. Carefully, I reached out for the lamp next to me, and with a pull of the cord, the whole room was bathed into an orange shade of light. Staring at the man, my eyes went so wide, they could have popped out of my skull. What I saw made my heart sink. He wasn't just wearing my dad's uniform. He was also wearing my dad's face. That man, that thing, Whatever it had carved my dad's face off and was wearing it like a damn mask. Blood was dripping from it, running down the man's neck and streaking the blue of the uniform. I just sat there, terrified, eyes bulging, as the man stood in the corner, watching me. Through the holes where my dad's eyes used to be, I could see how lifeless the ones that replaced them were. The man tilted his head as he stared at me, almost as if he was admiring the sight of something in front of him. I don't even know how long he stood there. An hour? Maybe 2. Out of nowhere, he dropped on all fours again and crawled out of the room with inhumane speed, making loud thuds as his hands and feet hit the floor. Even after he left, I still sat there for what must have been hours, still frozen. Eventually, I finally gathered the courage to go look. With my bare feet pressing against the cold hardwood floor, I slowly stepped my way towards the now wide open door to my bedroom. As I entered the living room, my eyes scanned the place in search of my dad, but he wasn't there. His gun was on the floor, next to a pile of glass shards in the frame of the broken coffee table. There was a huge trail of blood leading from it towards the wide open front door. I just stood there for a while, staring into nothing. The curtain swayed as the wind entered the house through the open door. After a while, I don't even know how long, I was finally able to snap out of it and call 911. After loads of questions, most of which I didn't have the answers to. They promised me they would catch whoever did this. They said my dad was one of them, and they wouldn't rest until they caught that bastard. It's been 20 years. They never did. I lived with my Aunt Gemma until I turned 18. I went to college, got a business degree, and did well for myself. I'm 36 now, same age as my dad was when it happened. After all this time, I never really understood what happened to my dad. For most of my life, I avoided the topic like it was the plague. However, on my 36th birthday, my Aunt Gemma called me to congratulate me. But as we were talking, she said the strangest thing. "Oh, sweetie, and don't you worry about it. It was just an awful coincidence," her voice said through the phone. "What are you talking about, Aunt Gemma?" I replied, confused. "You know, the whole thing with your father and grandfather, and turning 36. It was just a freaky and horrible coincidence." "Aunt Gemma, what do you mean? What happened to Grandpa? Your father never told you?" "No, he didn't." "Oh, then it's better this way, sweetie. I don't want to worry you over nothing." I tried my best to get her to explain, but she refused, and I ended up dropping the subject. How stupid I was. Anyways, it's been 2 months since I had the conversation with my aunt. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because about an hour ago, I looked through the window at my office at home and saw someone standing by the curb under the street lamp in front of my house. They were wearing a hoodie, which made it hard to see who they were. I was finally able to see their face when the person looked up at me. It looked like my dad. Hello, Earth. I'm writing this today because it feels wrong not to share it. I decided to tell you, internet strangers, because the world deserves to know what really happens when we die. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and you're probably wondering how I'm writing this, or why I'm conscious. I will explain everything, but first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Stephen Sterling. I'm 46 years old. I have terminal lung cancer, inoperable. That's probably the result of heavy smoking. Just stay away from cigarettes. I will probably be dead tomorrow. No, I'm not dead right now, just in case you were wondering. I just know what comes after tomorrow for me. I had been afraid of death before I found out what it was like. When I first got diagnosed, I was told that I had 3 months to live. It's the maximum, according to several doctors. That means I will be dead on January 25th, 2022. I hope I have enough time to at least finish this story. During those 3 months, I lived in fear every day, and did they go by fast. I couldn't stop thinking about what happens when we die. It was unbearable. I was just waiting for that day to finally come, without actually trying to do anything a dying person would do. Now, 3 months have almost passed, and I've wasted every single day doing nothing. I looked at the calendar in my room today. The date was January 24th. I will most likely not make it through the night. I was lying on my bed, looking at the ceiling. I had never noticed the small crack near the chandelier. While trying to remember when was the last time I even looked up in my house, I heard a knock at the door. I was extremely confused, because no one had knocked on that door for over 20 years. I was sure it was a mistake. So, I continued thinking about the unimportant crack on the ceiling. I let out a sigh. I really wasn't in the mood for free samples, or whatever the hell they were selling. Although, I was wrong. When I opened the door, no one was selling anything. It was my friend Larry, my only friend. He had found out about my situation and came to visit me. "Larry?" I said. He looked at me. He seemed so happy to see me, unusually happy. Then he hugged me. Even though it was only a hug, I had never felt more loved. We got inside, and I made us a cup of tea. "How did you—" I asked the question partially, but he understood. "Oh, I talked to your mother," he answered, and took his first sip of tea. "Yeah? I guess I should give her a call too. It's been a long time," I said. I reached over to grab my phone when he stopped me. "You know, I'm kinda in a rush. Why not talk to your mother later?" He calmly replied and took another sip of his tea. "You're right. Sorry about that. It was rude," I answered. After a few minutes of silence, Larry decided to finally say something. "I'm really sorry about that, Steve." "Thank you," I generically replied. "Have you ever wondered what happens after?" he said all of a sudden. I looked at him. He was sipping his tea while looking at me. "What happens after what?" I asked, even though I knew what he meant. "What do you think happens when we die, Steve?" Silence. What a question to ask a dying person, I was thinking. "I don't know. Eternal nothingness? Infinite blackness? Endless void? Whatever you call it. That's what happens," I said angrily. He chuckled and took another sip. "If you had the chance to know before it happens, would you take it?" I didn't respond. I looked at my cup of tea on the table. It was still full. I hate tea. I looked around. I looked at the old clock in the living room. It's sad how it'll live longer than most of us. I looked out the window. Children were playing outside. They will die too. I tried looking at the sun. It will eventually explode. I looked at the calendar on the wall. One day until the party. I wanted to cry it all out. I wanted Larry to leave. I wanted to be alone until my eternity. That feeling of fear struck me again. What's the meaning of it all? Why me? What comes after? So many questions, and yet so little answers. Yeah, I would take the chance. I finally replied. "I want to know what happens after death, Larry," I said in a quivering voice. Then he smiled. "Look out the window." I was confused again. "What do you mean, Larry?" I asked. "Just turn around," he said while still smiling. I turned around. I looked through the same window, but there weren't any kids. There was no sun. It was the universe? I walked to the window. Purple and black colors along the sparkling stars and asteroids. Everywhere. I felt a strong urge to go out and explore all of it. Another strange thing was, I didn't feel shocked or confused. It seemed like a promised land. Nothing strange, nothing unreal. I kept staring at the beautiful flow of matter. Words can't describe it. Larry, is this what it's like? I turned around. Larry was still there, still smiling. Yeah, but it's not completely the same, he replied and took the last sip of his tea. It's not the same, because you will no longer need to carry that flawed body around. He stood up and smiled again. I chose to say goodbye. I won't be here for long. I was a little confused. Don't worry. You'll understand soon. Until then, remember, possibilities are endless, not the void. I smiled too. I watched Larry leave my house. I turned around just to look at the world from that unique perspective one more time, but it was gone. The children were back. The sun was back. Everything went back to normal. Was that all just a dream? I was thinking. I looked at Larry's empty cup with the tea bag in it and smiled again. It wasn't a dream. I would never drink a cup of tea. I'm also not scared of death anymore. Now, when I know what it's like, what am I supposed to be afraid of? After several minutes of processing everything, the phone rang. It was my mom. Strange, she rarely calls. I picked up. I listened to my mother for about 15 seconds and then dropped the phone on the ground. She had bad news, and turns out that Larry Smith died in a car accident 2 days ago. Did I just talk to a dead person? I was thinking. No, that's not possible. Did Larry even come? That must have been a dream. Then I looked at his cup again. I screamed. I talked to a dead person. The same feeling of fear. I felt it yet again. Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! I was yelling on the floor, looking at the ceiling, looking at the crack. Then I moved my head to the left, ready to fall asleep, exhausted from all the screaming. But before I closed my eyes, I was able to see through the window one more time, and it was back, the universe. I got up immediately and walked to the window. I put my hands on the glass. I definitely wasn't sleeping. That was real, and that's what comes after. I was thinking about Larry and everything he had told me. He was out there, somewhere. I felt happy that he decided to visit his old friend during his final return to Earth. I, too, will soon be able to step outside the borders and break the limits of our bodies. I'm about to explore every star, every galaxy, and every planet, without anything pulling me behind. Who knows? Maybe there's something beyond the universe itself, something that our, again, limited brains can't even imagine, nor comprehend. I wish I could share every adventure of mine after tomorrow, but that's a journey everyone has to experience on their own. Until we meet again, I guess I should say. My husband Rowan told me about his night terrors early on while dating. Although he was ashamed to admit that a few times a week he would flail around violently while asleep, I did not look down on him for it. I was supportive. I guess you can say it was a true test to the strength of our relationship that none of his outbursts fazed me in the slightest. Sure, the occasional bump to the face startled me. But more times than not, I got a good chuckle out of it and went back to bed. The funny thing is, his snoring is what really got my blood boiling. There was no consistent rhythm or flow to his snoring sessions. One moment, quiet. The next, a gurgling yelp that sounded like he was sucking in his final breath. And that's why one evening, while we were both downing adult beverages in front of the TV, a commercial grabbed our attention. Is your spouse having trouble sleeping? Does he or she suffer from nightmares? Are you yourself losing sleep over it from their erratic behavior? Tired of restless nights? We can help. Our pillow is designed for comfort, but more importantly, it is built to drain your nightmares from existence, to wash your mind free of trouble. Order now and prepared for sleeping bliss, because quiet is just the beginning. We shot each other puzzled smirks. We were so drunk that only bits and pieces of the commercial stuck with us. There may have been more to it than I remember. What I do vividly recall is how excited I was to dial that number on the screen. I'm doing it. Consider it an early birthday gift. No more snoring for you, mister. Rowan laughed and pulled me in for a hug. When the pillow arrived, I could not contain my giggling. Laugh it up, babe. I know I look like a giant piece of cotton candy. I'm doing this for you. The pillow reminded me of one of those old school underwater diving helmets. You know, the ones that were copper-based. This pillow completely enclosed Rowan's head like a cocoon. There was only a hole for his mouth and nose. As we rested our heads against our pillows that first night, I eased into a quick slumber. I woke up a few hours later to use the bathroom. I looked over at Rowan. He was in a deep sleep, but it was quiet. No fits, no snoring, no noise. He looked so silly and cute that I could just not resist giving him a peck on the lips. His lips felt prickly, and not the prickly touch of a mustache I was used to. I grabbed my phone and put it near his mouth to put some light near the area. With each breath, I noticed something white just between his lips. "Get them off me!" he screamed in a wheezing gargle of a voice. I flew back off the bed, heart pounding in shock. I stood back up and rushed over to Rowan. He was scratching and clawing at the pillow, trying to remove it. It was dark, and I was having trouble understanding why it was so difficult for him to pull the pillow off his head. I flipped on the bedroom light switch. And that's when I saw it. The pillow was alive. Rowan sat up. 4 little branch-like legs jutted out through the pillow fabric on the left and right side of his face. Rowan's mouth slowly opened and a giant white sack drizzled out, rolling down his chest and onto the blanket. The sack pulsated in and out. 2 black fangs grew from within Rowan's nose and extended down to his chin. The pillow practically exploded into feathers, revealing Rowan's grotesque mutation. As soon as I saw the row of newly grown eyes across his forehead, I ran for the door and didn't look back. I could hear scurrying across the hardwood floors. It was after me. I made it outside and slammed the front door shut. A loud shattering of glass rattled my ears. Rowan's head, which now looked like a spider, had burst through the living room window. It traveled across the street and disappeared amongst the fog. I was dripping with sweat and on the verge of fainting, but a neighbor had heard the commotion and ran up to comfort me. I sat on the grass in a daze. Images of Rowan's head separated from his body made me vomit repeatedly. By the time the authorities arrived to inspect the house, I refused to go back in. I could not stomach looking at Rowan's headless body. Shortly after entering, an officer stormed out of the house yelling obscenities. He told me the house was swarming with spiders. I tried and tried to find the commercial again, but never saw it show up. I called the number that I initially dialed to place the order, but it was a dead number. I weep night after night in my new place, and anytime I find a spider lingering in the corner of a room, my mind goes to a dark, dark place. I see Rowan's disfigured, warped spider face. Anyone else get these bizarre voicemails? I started to get them last night. My ex had taken the kids for half the month, and I was home alone. My apartment was dark and quiet. You might say tomb-like. The TV was on, the volume down low. I was missing my kids, missing my ex, and despising myself for it. My phone lit up. I had to carefully remove the bowl of vanilla ice cream swimming in vodka from my stomach, lest it tip over. I saw a number I didn't recognize, so I did the sensible thing and ignored it. Then I got the familiar ding. One new voicemail. Okay, I thought I'll bite. The phone number hadn't read scam likely. Might even be important. The first time I played it back, I couldn't hear it well, but it sounded like numbers. So I put it on speakerphone, cranked up the volume to max. In a crackly drone, sounding like voice recording from the 1980s or earlier, someone read out these numbers. 04, 14, 01, 12, 18, 05, 13, 13, 21, 19. That was all the message they'd left. Straight away, I knew it wasn't a phone number. It was too many digits, and they were all spaced out into doubles. I tried to return to my low-effort binge watching at low volume, half-heartedly piecing together subtitles. Hours later, I couldn't get it out of my head. I won't tell you the actual number that called me, because I'd rather not. But I did give that number a call back. It was a number within my area code. I called it. It rang so much, I thought I'd be the one to go to voicemail this time. But then came the click. Except for some murmurs of static, it was quiet on the other end. "Hello?" I said. Somebody left a message from this number. It was all digits, not a phone number, just... I don't know what it was. Clearer now, breathing on the other end. "Hello?" Click again. They'd hung up. Brief, but bothersome. I didn't have much time to let it bother me, though, because within 10 minutes, I got a call back from that same number. I answered it instead of letting it go to voicemail. Whoever it was immediately ended the call. Okay, I thought. That's pretty odd. About another 10 more minutes, another call. I answered again. Same treatment. As soon as I said hello, they hung up. I didn't answer the next one because I was using the restroom. That one went to voicemail. I heard the ding and the buzz as soon as I entered my living room again. Hands clammy, I picked up my phone and played it back. I kind of expected another weird series of digits. Instead, what I got was this. "Hey, what's the strangest thing you've ever seen at a museum? Went to that Carnival museum today. You know the one. I saw a costume that reminded me of you. Got me thinking. Anyway, don't want to talk your ear off. And the kids send their best. We're doing great, and everyone's happy. Can't wait to see you." It was a man's voice, but one I did not recognize. Carnival museum. When did I go to a carnival museum? I tried to remember all the parades I'd ever attended, New Orleans and elsewhere. I couldn't recall stopping at any carnival museums. Must have me confused with someone else. On the other hand, the voicemails and wordless calls wanted to suggest other things. What those were, I wasn't sure. I glanced around. My TV was flickering, but the apartment was dark besides that. A chill slowly worked its way from head to toe, like a bad massage. About another 10 minutes, and I got another call. I let this one go to voicemail. "You won't believe what happened today," the same man's voice said. "JJ, you know Joey Jr.? Fell from a tree and broke some stuff. I told that boy about climbing them trees. But then, get this. That's not even the most unbelievable part. We didn't need to see a doctor. Just gave him some ice cream, and he was right as rain. Walking just fine. Now, there's a little hitch in his step, but it's the kind of thing that adds character. We played some family games. Before you know it, things are back to normal. There I go again. I'm sure I'm talking your ear off. And I know we'll be seeing each other very soon. We're doing great, though, and everyone's happy." This is getting ridiculous, I thought. I tried to pick apart my mind, thinking back to all my old acquaintances. Even if this was somebody I knew, there was no way I was planning on meeting or seeing them, as those messages suggested. I called the number again, before another rough 10 minutes could transpire. "Hey, don't hang up. I don't know you or your family. You've got me confused with somebody else." Click. At least I had them on the line for a few rushed sentences. The messages continued, every rough 10 minutes like clockwork that someone bashed with a hammer. Anytime I picked up and didn't let it go to voicemail, I was rewarded with the call quickly ending. Every message told some new details of that family's lives. How their daughter Abigail got herself hurt by chasing after some cars. How Joey Jr. had tried to eat a cockroach. How Rebecca had to get her wisdom teeth out, and it was a messy experience. How they all gone shopping for secondhand clothing, so fresh it might have been pulled straight from the backs of others. Even though these messages were spaced out at rough 10-minute intervals, It seemed he was describing separate days, weeks, months even. Another strange thing was how, about near the end of each voicemail, the man concluded with, "We're doing great and everyone's happy." When it ate into my sleep, I lost about every ounce of my patience. Oh, I was scared, but I was also fed up. So I gave their number another call. "I don't want to hear how great you're doing," I said, "and how happy you are. Do you hear me? No more voicemails." Heavy breathing on the other end. Sounded like more than one person doing it. "I'll ask for your forgiveness for not going about this earlier. I'm kind of an old soul, at least when it comes to things like technology." I put my phone on silent. And I finally got to searching online for that phone number that was calling me. You know, seeing if there was anything about it, tied to scammers and stuff like that. I didn't find anything online about scammers, but that number was connected to a company that had locations all over. I'm talking about all over the country. And while I won't tell you the name of it, I will tell you that it had the word happiness in it. There wasn't much information online, on the official website or elsewhere. There was some creepy pictures on the official website, oozing happiness in bright monochromes from the About section. I wasn't sure whether it was supposed to be a pharmaceutical company or some kind of wellness center. While I was doing all that searching, I had received a bunch of voicemails I hadn't listened to yet. My phone had been on silent, remember? Glancing over from my office chair, I noticed dawn slipping in through the blinds. I raised them and looked out of my apartment window. Soft blue, red, and yellow in bands, with the yellow flowing around the trees. It was like a painted, uncooked Easter egg that had been broken with the yolk spilling out. Made me think of the last Easter I'd spent with my family. I had gotten fussy with my ex about using real eggs. She'd said, "What other eggs are you supposed to paint?" "They might stink in the sun," I said. Somehow, other expletives got flung around. The next thing you know, the kids were crying, throwing their own fits. And Easter egg hunt canceled. Like Hemingway describes bankruptcy, it happened gradually and then suddenly, about like the breakup in our marriage. Weird how a sunrise through the trees can remind a person of things like that. I guess my mind was on family, largely from all those voicemails from Joey Sr., Family Man of the Year. I pulled up my desk chair to the window and just stared a while. My phone dinged and buzzed. Pretty soon, I might be receiving voicemails from work. I'd have to shower and get ready. Sleep, and whatever this was, had to wait. One thing I learned from the dissolution of our family unit was that practicalities of life didn't care. Oh, the people involved in these practicalities pretended to care. But when it came to work, if you didn't show up, you got replaced. Didn't matter what was going on in your personal life. And who can blame them? It's all a machine. I showered and got dressed for work. As soon as I opened my front door, I saw them. They were past my apartment complex road and past parking lots. Back past the manicured magnolia and golden rain trees, up under the wilder canopy of blackjacks and pines. A man, a woman, 2 children, holding hands. I couldn't hear them, but I could read their lips. Over and over again, rapidly they were saying, "We're doing great and everyone's happy. We're doing great and everyone's happy." I peered, but couldn't see their faces well above their feverishly working mouths. They wore old clothing, garments that belonged in the attic, or left hanging at a yard sale. I peered, but didn't dare to step onto my patio. Cars drove by in the parking lot, clueless to what was lurking in the trees. I imagined someone approaching them. I imagined that family jumping out with knives, stabbing and slashing their victim, while they all chanted over and over, "We're doing great, and everyone's happy." I went inside, locked my door, and latched the windows, and got the police on the phone. The person I spoke with became fixated on prank calls, and how there wasn't much they could do, unless death threats were involved. It's like they completely ignored the part of the family outside my apartment stalking me. So, they're happy, huh? Well, that's good. I'd be more concerned if they weren't. They advised me just to block the number. Problem was, I was afraid if I blocked them, they'd do more than stalking. The police didn't even send anyone out. After speaking with them, I found I had just gotten a new voicemail during the conversation. The moisture in my mouth suddenly got into my hands. I played it back. Hey, still waiting on you. If you want to go over to this address, you'd beat us there. Then, you'd be the one waiting. We can catch up there. Good things to come over the horizon. We're doing great, and everyone's happy. That address in the message, I recognized it. I got back on my computer and pulled up my browser history to confirm. It was that company's closest location. The company's number they were calling from was associated with. And what about the series of digits in the very first message I'd gotten? Now, as I finish typing all this up, I've got a decision to make, and I'm not sure how much time is left to make it. The last message seemed especially threatening. Difficult for me to explain. Something in the emphasis, worse, maybe, is that I haven't received a single voicemail since the last one. I don't know what that means. I might be okay until nightfall, until that family is less worried, maybe about being seen. A part of me just wants to go into work, hoping it'll all make me forget about what's going on here. Maybe I can sleep there, at the office, instead of coming back home. I'm concerned that if I don't go to that location from their last message, they'll do something extreme. But there's something else. Sorry I haven't mentioned it yet. I was trying to get this all down. As I was trying to get it all down, I took breaks to look out the window near my front door. They're out there all right, most of the time holding hands, mouths moving rapidly. Other times, there's this other thing. Like all that happiness had cast a great big shadow. A tall shape moves occasionally in the trees past the parking lot. Its arms and legs work like slinkies. Its head slings back and forth, like it's trying to free itself from its body. Somehow, I know, it isn't very happy at all. This is the first time that I am sharing this story, as I didn't feel ready to tell anyone until this point. I had never believed in the paranormal, or anything like that, until that fateful day 7 years ago. I used to be one of those people who was always up for an adventure. I was never in a long-term relationship, as I could never stay in one place for that long. I was young and stupid, and believed that I was invincible. I look back on what I was like back then, and I wish I could punch my younger self. I was in a pub in Ireland back in 2013 on Christmas, when a family friend walked up and started talking away. He was obviously drunk as a skunk, and kept slurring his words. He kept bragging about how he climbed Mount Everest a few years ago. I gazed down at his rounded belly, and knew that part of his life was long over. The idea of climbing Mount Everest stuck in my head over the next few months. I began to train myself and climbed all the mountains that I could in Ireland. They are only tiny little things, so it wasn't that hard. I eventually believed that I was fit enough to climb Everest, and organized flights to get there. I had a lot of savings, and I didn't care about the cost. I remember the first time I looked up at the imposing mass that was Mount Everest. It was as beautiful as it was terrifying. A small part of me, at the time, wanted to turn around and flee, but the arrogance of youth overruled common sense. There were a few climbers who were going up at the same time, and we quickly formed into a tight-knit group. There was Kat and AJ, who were a married couple from America, who loved to experience new things. There was also an English couple, Greg and Barry, who took on the role of the parental figures. There were a couple of other people with us, but none of them relevant to the story. The climb itself was long and arduous, as I had never experienced such hardship in my life. I almost quit on a number of occasions, but the group kept me going. They helped me overcome any fear or doubt that was going inside my head, and kept all my spirits high. The only time that we grew quiet is when we passed the body of a climber who had failed in their attempt to climb this mountain. A number of our group had given up, and we were slowly reaching the summit. The guide told us we were maybe 2 days away from the top. He kept trying to make us walk slower, but we were in high spirits and just wanted to press on. I could see the fear in his eyes at times, but dismissed it as me just being paranoid. We reached the camp nearest the summit and prepared to rest for a few hours. I was surprised to discover it was April Fool's Day and decided to play a couple of pranks on the others later. We gathered up our equipment and we were ready to finish our journey. Our guide refused to let us move and pleaded with us to leave it for one more day. I could see the concern on everyone's faces, but I had put too much effort into this and I just wanted to finish what I had started. I convinced the others to come with me, and we set off without the guide. The next few hours were probably the hardest we had since we started this. It was a constant effort to keep ourselves going and not give up. I had a weird feeling that someone was watching me and kept noticing stuff moving out of the corner of my eye. The mood in the group was very tense, and we were all freaked out. Our mood vastly improved as we finally reached the top and gazed around at the beautiful panoramic views that were in all directions. I couldn't wipe the smile off my face and ignored the alarm bells that were going off in my head. My brain was trying to warn me about something, but I was just too happy to care. My joy quickly evaporated as Kat let out a scream of terror. I spun around to see her standing there, gazing down at her feet. It took me a few moments to realize what she was looking at. There was a hand coming out of the ground that was now latched onto her leg. Before any of us could react to whatever was holding onto her, it began to pull her downwards. We rushed to help and grabbed onto her arms, but whatever was pulling her was incredibly strong. Her body began to twist and break as it was forcefully dragged. It seemed like an eternity for her body to disappear, but it was only the matter of seconds. We all stood there in shock until AJ let out an animal-like scream and began desperately digging at the ground in a futile attempt at reaching her body. None of us knew what to do or how to react, and we were just looking at each other in high hopes that someone would come up with an idea. We were still standing like this when I noticed other people coming towards us. I felt relief surge through me, as they could help us retrieve Kat's body. I tried to rush to them to get help, but my body refused to move. I felt my blood run cold as the other group got closer. Their bodies were blue, and I recognized some of them as the dead climbers we had passed earlier. Greg was the first to scream as the group started their attack. AJ didn't even realize they were here before they overwhelmed him. They began to rip all of his equipment off and then tore off his warm clothing. One of them shoved his hand into his chest, and I watched as they ripped out his still beating heart. Hands shot out of the ground and dragged his body beneath the surface. Greg and Barry were now standing back to back and were desperately trying to hold back the dead climbers, who were now circling them, waiting to pounce. The climbers suddenly all attacked at once, and Barry and Greg were immediately trapped beneath a wall of bodies. Their screams were quickly cut off as the dead climbers ripped out their hearts. I now stood alone, with the dead climbers all around me. They gazed at me with their frozen eyes and waited. I don't know what came over me at the time, but I just reacted, and it definitely saved my life. I grabbed 2 of the ice axes we had used to climb, and just charged at one of them that was blocking the way we came up. I managed to knock him out of the way, but felt arms latch onto me and attempt to stop me. I used the axes and quickly fought off any of them that came close. They moved back and let me pass, but I was still wary about them trying anything. I can barely remember the climb down to the camp. I could feel eyes on me the whole time as they watched me leave. I finally reached the camp, and the guide wasn't surprised that I was by myself. He just gazed at me with annoyance on his face and told me that we should have just listened to him. He sat me down and explained that there was a curse on this mountain, and every 7 years the dead rise for one day and will kill anyone that gets in their way. I lost 3 of my toes to frostbite on the descent and have become almost like a hermit in the last few years. I know 7 years have passed, and I beg you to stay away from Mount Everest. There is more to fear from this mountain than just snow and ice. Are you sleeping? If not, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you wish to hear more No Sleep narrations, let me know in the comments below. Sometimes, no sleep is scarier than our dreams. Stay Stay safe out there.